for each number of attack on the missile weapon table, you're going to pick. Welcome to Empty Wallets. My name is Gabe, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Age of Sigmar in 20 minutes.
Nice!
There are so many rules in Age of Sigmar, and we have limited time, so we're going to go over the basics just so you can get on the table and start playing. But we do have some videos on our channel currently that you can go through that dive a little bit deeper into some of the rules, and we'll have a new series coming out that goes even deeper into that to talk about strategy and some of the more intense rules that you'll need to know when playing the game. Before you can start playing, you're going to need some tools so you can actually play the game. We've got dice, there's rulers, there's measurements involved. The game is played in inches, so you need to make sure you have measurements in inches so that you can measure models moving or range or things like that. So you want to make sure you have inch measurements. We're also going to need six-sided dice. So the game is only played with six-sided dice. You can find that pretty much at any game store. We like colored ones. You can get some that are smaller, some that are bigger. You're going to be rolling lots of dice. So make sure you have enough dice on hand. The next thing you're going to need are the models themselves. Most people buy them from GW and build them and paint them how they want. Some people will 3D print them. Kind of the general rule is as long as you have a model and it resembles the model it's supposed to look like, you're good. Some tournaments will require them to be painted, but most people are cool just playing with what you have. And you might even have a friend that's cool enough to let you just use a little base. So make sure you talk to your opponent before you bring certain models to the table if they're not regular GW models. The last thing you're gonna need are your books. You're definitely gonna want your army book that's gonna have all your rules for your army, your Warscrolls, and if you're playing competitively or at a tournament, you're gonna want the General's Handbook for that season. Or you can use the app that they have. We really like using the app. It's got all Warscrolls. You can add your book with the codes to it. You can build lists. Definitely recommend using the app if you can. All right, let's talk about the flow of the game. So the game is broken up into 5 rounds. Each person gets a turn in that round, and then each turn is broken up into 6 phases. I know that's a lot, but so think of it as I'm gonna go, and my opponent's gonna go. And then in each of our turns, we're gonna have 6 phases we go through, which will be the hero phase, the movement phase, shooting phase, charging phase, combat phase, and then the Battleshock phase. And then once that Battleshock phase ends, we go to the next turn. After both players have done their turn in the round, then we go to the next round. When determining who gets to go first in a round, the first round will be done by whoever finishes placing all their models on the table. We'll go over that later, but they'll get to pick who goes first. The person who's going second will get some benefits such as an extra command point. They'll get some certain extras depending on the season and the General's Handbook. And then once the first round is done, you start the second turn, you're gonna roll off. Each of you will take a 6-sided dice, roll it on the table, and see who has the higher roll. If you tie, it goes to the person who went first. They must take the first turn. When somebody goes back to back, so if I take the second turn and then the next round I get the first turn, that's called double turning. And it can be really, really strong, but you can decide if you win the roll-off to wait and hold on to that double turn till later. Models are grouped up into units, which have Warscrolls. And those Warscrolls will give you information about how that unit can be played in a battle. Some units are made up of 1 model, some are made up of 3, some are made up of 30. So you wanna make sure you look at your unit's Warscroll, how many models they can have, as well as how many points they're worth. And you can find that in the back of your Battletome. These Warscrolls are gonna give you their abilities, as well as how many attacks they have, their movement, their health, so on. So make sure you have those Warscrolls. At the bottom of each Warscroll, you're gonna have keywords. Those keywords are gonna be mentioned in other rules throughout the game, such as a unit with the Khorne keyword can get this ability, or the unit with the Slaves to Darkness keyword get this ability. So make sure that you know what the keywords are, and you can find those at the bottom of your Warscrolls. Throughout each phase, you can use abilities that are called command abilities. These require command points. Command points are gathered at the beginning of each round, and at the beginning of each turn, each player will get a certain number of them. When you use a command point, you must spend it. We usually keep track of that with a dice, or you can mark it on a piece of paper. You will carry out that ability with a hero or a champion to use on a certain unit that's within range. Follow the rules on the command ability. A lot of them are different. There are some command abilities that are on a Warscroll. There are some that are army specific, and then there are some that are available to all armies through the core rules. Before your first battle, you want to pick your army. You can either pick an army that looks the most fun, you like the models, however you want, just pick an army. Each army is different. They have different abilities, they have different units, so it's really important to pick one that you think you'll enjoy. Once you've picked your army, you need to start picking units that you'll use in your army. Sometimes you can buy box sets that come with specific units, a bundle that will give you the army. That's a great place to start. Each unit is worth a certain number of points. And so sometimes you'll show up to a table that has a 1,000-point game, a 2,000-point game, and you want to make sure that you build your army in that point value. You can always be under, but you can never be over. And it's really good to try to get right up to that amount. If you or your opponent don't really have a clean 1,000 or 2,000, you can work out with them on what number you're aiming for. Make sure when picking your army, you have enough heroes and battle line that you need. There are certain rules, especially with match play, on how many heroes you can bring as well as how many battle line you must bring. On the very back of your battle tome, you'll see a list of all of your units with the points as well as what their battlefield role is. So they can either they're a hero or they're battle line. And then on the side, you'll see if they're unique or if they become battle line, if a certain person is a general. So you want to make sure that you kind of build your army to synergize with that. Don't get too stressed out about it though, especially if you bought a box set, they generally come already synergized like that. So like again, it's a great place to start. After you've picked your heroes and your units, you need to pick a general. Generally, you want to pick a general that is going to be able to stay on the table the longest because you get buffs while you have the general on the table. But you also want to make sure that any abilities they get, or if they are a general, if this unit becomes this, you want to check to make sure that you're picking the right hero as your general. Next, you're going to put your units into a battalion. Battalions are groups of units that give you abilities or some buffs, such as one-drop deployment, where you get to drop all of the units at the same time. So you're going to want to fill those battalions with a specific battlefield role that they have, and you can find those in the core book. Those are found in your battle tome. They can also be found in the general's handbook. Most of them require at least a hero and sometimes a troop, but it'll tell you what is allowed into a battalion and what's required for a battalion. Last but not least, you're going to want to pick a grand strategy. Grand strategies are a tactic that you're going to be trying to accomplish throughout the entire game. Grand strategies will give you points at the end of a battle that helps to determine who wins and who loses the game. They'll also be used as a tiebreaker in some cases, so it's important to make sure that you pick a grand strategy that you think you're going to be able to accomplish. Now that you've picked your army, we need to set up the battle. Before you start setting up terrain on the table, you're going to need to pick a battle plan. Battle plans are essentially rules of engagement. What is the objective of each army? What are the objectives that are on the table? What are the rules of scenery and where you're going to get to deploy? Battle plans can be found everywhere. They're in the core book, they're in the general's handbook, they're in Battletomes, they're in White Dwarfs, they're all over the place. So you can really pick a battle plan that you'd like to use. If it's a match play game, you're going to need to use the ones in the general's handbook. But other than that, pick which one you want to play. You and your opponent can decide either by rolling a dice or just picking one off the chart or the table. Once you pick a battle plan, you're going to need to determine who's player A and who is player B. That's going to be determined by rolling a dice. It's a roll off. So I'm going to roll a dice, my opponent's going to roll a dice. If I get a 3 and they get a 4, they've won. If we tie, we'll re-roll again until we have a winner, even if we tie again. Whoever wins the roll-off will get to determine who's the attacker and who's the defender. Defender is going to set up the battle. First, they're going to place the objective markers in the appropriate places that it shows on the battle plan, and then they can start setting up terrain. Some rules about terrain is they must be placed on the field 6 inches away from other pieces of terrain, 3 inches away from objectives, and 3 inches away from the edge of the battlefield. But you can place as many terrain pieces as you want. There is a recommended number for the table size that you'll be using. Recommended table size is a 44 by 60, but you can play really anywhere. And just make sure that when you're placing terrain, it makes sense for the game. If you're the one placing terrain, by all means, use it to your advantage. There's a lot of tactics that people use to be able to place the terrain so that they can make sure they have an edge over their opponent. Terrain comes in all shapes and sizes. So if you're concerned about how big your terrain is and you need some recommendations, you can find those in the core book, the general's handbook, and your battle tome. That'll tell you if you have 2 really big pieces, maybe only put 6 on the table. So you can find those in those books. After the defender has finished setting up the battle, the attacker is going to decide which side they would like to play on. On the battle plan, you'll see kind of 2 areas that are highlighted. One's red, one's blue. Attacker will get to determine which side they would like to be the red side. And that's where they'll deploy, and the defender will deploy in the blue zone. After the attacker decides which side they want, they get to place the first model on the table. The battle plan will tell you where you're allowed to place. Sometimes it's 9 inches away from enemies, sometimes it's 12 inches away from the enemy territory, so make sure that you're looking at the battle plan rules for deployment. Once the attacker sets up their first unit, then the defender gets to set up a unit. Then the attacker sets up a unit, then the defender sets up a unit, and it goes back and forth until each person has no more units to place on the table. If one of the players finishes placing before the other person and they have tons more models to place, they get to place all of them at the same time. There's also battalions that allow you to do a one-drop deployment, where you can place all of the units that are in that battalion on the table at once. Some units have more than one model, and when that's the case, you want to make sure that when you place them on the table, they're near each other. This is called coherency. Units with 5 or less models need to be within an inch of another model in that unit. Just like these fleshhounds here, they only need to be within an inch of one other model in that unit. When there are 6 or more models in a unit, they need to be within an inch of at least 2 other models in that unit. Just like these plague bearers here, they're set up so that they're within an inch of at least 2 other models in the unit. Once models are removed from the table from this unit and they get brought down to 5, then their rules of coherency go down, even though the unit started with more. So as long as there's only 5 models on the table, they only need to be within an inch of one other. The moment they go 6 or higher, they need to be within an inch of 2 other models. This coherency needs to be held throughout the entire game. When you move them, when they get killed, they need to make sure that they're always within coherency. At the end of a turn, you're going to look at the table and see if there are any units that have models that are not within coherency. If that's the case, you're going to remove models from that unit until it is within coherency, and those models that you've removed are considered to have been slain. So it's really important to make sure that you have your units in coherency throughout the entire battle. The first person to finish placing all of their models on the table gets to choose who goes first and who goes second in the first battle round. After you've determined who's going to be taking the first turn in that battle round, you're going to give out command points for the round. The person taking the first turn will get 1 command point. The person who's taking the second turn will get 2 command points. Command points are different than victory points, so make sure you keep those separate. During your turn, before you start your hero phase, you need to make sure you pick a battle tactic. Battle tactics are the goal that you're trying to accomplish during your turn. This could be trying to take an objective, trying to kill a hero. There's lots of different things. Those can be found in the General's Handbook, the Core Book, and your Battletome. Now that you've picked your battle tactic, we can start the hero phase. Generally, we like to start the hero phase with heroic actions. Heroic actions are a way that you can pick a hero on the battlefield to do something awesome. You can find those in Core Book, General's Handbook, and your Battletomes. At the start of each hero phase, both you and your opponent will get 1 command point if your general is still on the table. During the hero phase, you can also cast spells with your wizards and attempt prayers with your priests. Those are usually one-time effects, but sometimes they're longer effects that stay on the table in the form of endless spells and invocations. Those are actual models that you have on the table. You're only allowed to cast spells and attempt prayers when it is your hero phase. When a wizard casts a spell, your opponent has the option to unbind that spell if they have a wizard or a model on the table that can attempt to do so. How that works is when the wizard rolls to see if they cast the spell, the opponent will then roll against that to see if they get a higher number. If they get the higher number, that spell is dispelled and has no effect. When an endless spell is successfully cast and placed on the table, in later hero phases, you can attempt to dispel it, but you cannot attempt to dispel it in the same turn that it has been cast successfully. Make sure you check your army for any hero phase abilities that they're allowed to use, and you can use those in this phase. After the hero phase, we will start the movement phase. In the movement phase, you guessed it, you're going to move your models. You move your models a number of inches equal to the characteristic on their war scroll. During the movement phase, only the person whose turn it is allowed to move any models. You're going to pick a unit on the table that you want to move with. Take out your tape measure and start measuring how far they can move depending on their war scroll. You don't have to move that many inches, just up to that many inches. So you're going to take your tape measure from the front of the base, and then move it along that many inches. If you want to get a little bit of extra movement in there, you can do what's called running. Running will allow you to move them further than their movement characteristic, but you won't be able to shoot or charge with them later in the shooting and charging phase. To determine how far they can run, you're going to roll a 6-sided dice, and whatever the number is, you'll add that to your move characteristic. You cannot move your models any closer than 3 inches from an enemy model, so they must finish their move outside of 3 inches. If your unit is already within 3 inches of an enemy unit, you cannot move in that turn unless you are retreating. Retreating, you can move a number of inches equal to your move characteristic, but you will lose the ability to shoot or charge later in that turn. If you have a unit in your army that has the fly characteristic, they can fly over units and over terrain, but make sure that they finish their move within the amount that they're allotted, as well as farther than 3 inches from enemy models. When you move a unit, you are not allowed to pass through any other units on the table, including your own. Now that we've finished movement, we're going to start with shooting. During your shooting phase, you can pick a unit on the table that has shooting attacks. You can find those on the war scroll under missile weapons. If they have a missile weapon armed, they can shoot an opponent. You're only allowed to use shooting attacks if it is your turn. The first thing you want to do is check the range of that attack. Sometimes it'll be 8 inches, 18 inches. Just make sure you check how far it is. You're gonna make sure that each model in your unit is within that range to an enemy unit. When picking a unit to shoot, if there is an enemy unit within 3 inches of them, they must shoot that unit, and they cannot shoot units that are farther away. Once you determine how many models in your unit are within range, you can start attacking. If you have more than one missile weapon, you can choose which one you want to use first, but make sure you use the correct range measurements for each one. To start the attack, you want to check how many times each model can use this attack. The attack's characteristic will either say 1 or 2 or 3, and that's going to determine how many dice you get to roll. For example, if we have 10 shooters here and they get to do 2 attacks each, we're gonna roll 20 dice. So we're gonna roll 20 dice, and we need to make sure that we match our to hit value. We wanna make sure we hit. The to hit value will be a number with a plus. That means that if it's a 3+, we either need to roll a 3 or higher to make sure that it hits. For each dice that is below a 3, so a 1 or 2, you're gonna remove that from the dice that you've just rolled. All of the dice that successfully hit, we're gonna re-roll them to see if we actually wound the enemy. This is gonna be a different number on the same table. The same rules apply for the to hit. If it's a 3 up, anything that is a 3, 4, 5, or 6 are gonna go through. Anything that's a 2 or a 1, you're gonna remove. After you've determined how many of those attacks go through, let's say 10 of them go through, you're gonna tell your opponent 10 of the attacks have gone through, and you're gonna tell them if there's any rend. What rend does, it'll tell your opponent how much harder it is for them to save against these, because they're gonna get to roll to see if their armor is strong enough to defend against these attacks. Your opponent is gonna look at their unit's war scroll to see what their save value is. Their save value will determine how strong their armor is against attacks like this. Let's say this is a 4 up. They're gonna take that 4 up and they're gonna roll the dice that wounded and see if they save against any of them. Same thing applies. A 4, 5, or 6 would save, and a 3, 2, or 1 would not save. Make sure that you apply any rend. So if the rend is a -1, that makes their save that much harder. It is now a 5 up. They need to remove 1 from the roll. So even if they rolled a 4, they needed a 5 instead. Now that you've determined how many attacks have gone through their save roll, you're gonna check how much damage each attack does. Let's say 5 of them, and the damage is 2 each. That would be 10 damage to the enemy unit. Your opponent is then going to look at their unit's war scroll and determine how many wounds each model has. Your opponent will decide which models are slain from the attacks you've just caused. If this unit has 2 wounds each and you've dealt 10 damage, they will remove 5 models. Some attacks or abilities will deal mortal wounds, which you cannot save against. You just have to take that damage. But other units have what are called wards. Wards allow you to save against each wound individually, just like a save roll would, and those are negated. Once the last model in a unit has been slain, that whole unit has been destroyed and they are fully removed from the table. After you're finished with shooting, we'll move on to charging. Charging is what closes the gap between you and your enemy. If you remember in the movement phase, you cannot move closer than 3 inches to an enemy. This is how you do it with charging. You're only allowed to charge if it is your turn. To attempt to charge, you're going to pick a unit on the table and roll 2 dice. Add those numbers together, and you're gonna get to move that unit a number of inches equal to whatever you rolled. If that number does not put your unit within half an inch of the enemy unit they're attempting to charge, they are not able to charge. Make note, you don't have to pick a unit that you are charging. You just have to make sure that the unit that you are charging with and their charge roll can end within half an inch of any enemy models. After you've charged with all of the units you'd like to charge with, we will move on to Monstrous Rampages. Those happen at the end of the charging phase. You're gonna pick a unit on the table with the monster keyword, and they're gonna do a Monstrous Rampage from either your Battletome or the core rules. Depending on which Monstrous Rampage you pick, there are different rules on how they affect or how they are succeeded. You can find a list of the Monstrous Rampages you can use in either a Battletome or the core rules. But only monsters are allowed to use these Monstrous Rampages. You're gonna get to do a Monstrous Rampage with each monster in your army, but each Monstrous Rampage can only be used once. Unlike other phases, your opponent will also get to do a Monstrous Rampage. I will finish all of my Monstrous Rampages with my monsters first, and then my opponent will get to do all of their Monstrous Rampages with their monsters. After Monstrous Rampages are complete, we move on to the combat phase. The combat phase is the one phase in a turn where both players will get to take actions throughout the whole phase. Starting with the player whose turn it is, they're gonna pick a unit in their army that is within 3 inches of an enemy unit. They're going to choose to attack that enemy unit. First, they'll do a pile-in move where they get to move their unit 3 inches. They must make sure that they end their pile-in no further than the closest unit than they started their pile-in. After you made the pile-in move, you can now fight with all of the melee weapons that unit is armed with. In the same way as shooting, you're gonna look at the range of the weapon and measure to make sure that all of the models in your unit are within range of the enemy unit to attack. You're gonna look at the attack's characteristic. You'll roll dice to see if you hit, to see if you wound. Make sure you check your rend, and then your opponent will roll to see if they save against it. Any attacks that make it through the save roll will deal damage to the enemy unit. Once the attack sequence with that unit is done, it is now your opponent's turn to pick an enemy unit that will then attack one of your units. And you'll repeat that process until you both have no more units to attack with. If I finish attacking with all of my eligible units, my opponent will get to finish attacking with all of the eligible units that they have left. The same way as the shooting phase, there are mortal wounds and wards. So make sure you check your Warscrolls to see if your unit has any mortal wounds they get to deal out, or any wards they get to use to defend against any damage. After the combat phase is done, we will start the last phase, which is Battleshock. This is an accumulation of the entire turn to see how many models are going to flee because of all of the wounds and chaos that have happened around them. Starting with the player whose turn it is, they're going to look at each unit that has lost any models during this entire turn. With each unit that has had any models slain during this turn, you're going to do a Battleshock roll. A Battleshock roll is determined by rolling a dice and adding that to the number of models that were slain during this turn. You're then going to compare your Battleshock roll with your bravery characteristic on your Warscroll. If your Battleshock roll is higher than your bravery, then you have failed the Battleshock test. For each point that your Battleshock roll is higher than your bravery, you will remove one model from the table. So if our bravery is 5 and our Battleshock roll was a 10, we must remove 5 models from the table. Once you have finished the Battleshock phase, it is now the end of that turn. If you're playing a battle plan with objectives, at the end of your turn, you're going to determine how many objectives on the table you're controlling. Controlling those objectives will give you points, and the criteria for controlling them will be in the battle plan. If this was the first turn in the round, it is now your opponent's turn to take the second turn. If this is the second turn in the round, you will now roll off to see who is going to take the first turn in the next round. The core book has a scoring sheet you can use. We like to just copy it on a piece of paper and keep track of what battle plans we're using, what battle tactics we've used, how many points we got that turn, and so on. Your battle plan will tell you when the battle will end. Normally, it's after 5 battle rounds, after a time limit has been reached, or after you've tabled your opponent and they have no models left to play with. And that is how you can play Age of Sigmar right now. If you like this video but you want to know more about Age of Sigmar, we have other videos on our channel that dive a little bit deeper, but we're also going to be adding some more videos that go even deeper into the game that talk about some of the more intricate rules that you can use and battle tactics and strategies that you can apply when playing a battle. We also have some army spotlights on the channel and more to come, where we talk about each army, how to play them, how to play against them, some of the tactics that they like to use. If you're interested in any of them, these are great videos to see if you want to play the army or if you're about to play somebody with the army, and you get to see a quick insight into what that army is all about. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you learned something, please leave a like. If you have any questions, please comment, but also join our Discord. We have tons of people in there that want to help you learn how to play this game, and it's a great place to ask questions, especially if you're confused or you just need somebody to show you the ropes on a certain army that you're trying to build. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time. Glad that's over with.